Okay, before we start, is there any questions about anything? You know by now, hopefully, that assignment 2 is posted. It's due next week. Yeah. Everyone's done it? No questions about it? Sure. Right. Yeah, no, I've never asked a exam question where you have to spontaneously do a cognitive walkthrough of something. It'd probably be too much to put the user interface on the exam. But no, it's fine. Yeah. In fact, well, we can talk a bit about the exam. Last year, it was kind of weird. I can't remember why, but anyways, it ended up being almost entirely multiple choice. And it's a good chance that this year, it actually worked out fine. So I might just make an all multiple choice, or maybe 1 or 2 questions that are short answer, and then the rest will be multiple choice. And yeah. So the exam will also be open book, not completely open book, I should say. You can bring a sheet of 1 piece of paper, and you can write whatever you want on it. And yeah, the exam schedule is posted on the graduate. I think it's 2 weeks after the last class. They tried to make it like if your class is on Friday, your exam is on Friday at the same time. So anyways, I forget the exact date. Actually, I linked to it here, I think. Okay, yeah. So it's here on Moodle if you want to find it. Yeah, in FG, which is now reopened. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? You'll have to bring a pencil for the exam because the multiple choice you'll do on a Scantron form. And so I'll have extra pencils, and I'll remind you many times before that, but it's one thing. Yeah. Sorry, I can't hear you. I'm actually going to close the door. Sorry, say it again louder. Oh yeah, the project date. So projects are due the last day of class officially. Generally, we're not allowed to ask for things to be submitted during your exam period because that's for studying for your exams. However, if you want to hand it in after the last day of class, that's fine. I won't apply a penalty to it. So I don't know what do you want? Just tell me what you want. And my constraint is I often mark the exam before the projects anyways, but it takes a long time to read projects, right? Because you have 8 pages each, you have 75 students, I have 2 classes, right? It's like reading a textbook. And so whenever your project is due, you won't be able to see your mark for like at least 2 weeks after the project's due, kind of thing. So the earlier the project's due, the quicker you get your mark. Of course, you won't get it any quicker than the final exam anyways. But anyway, so that's the basic constraint. But other than that, I'm pretty flexible. So yeah, do you want to have it due on the last day of class, or do you want an extension? Okay. And so what's a good kind of date? The Monday after the last class? Is that what you said? I just didn't hear. 1 week after the last class? Yeah. So that's fine. So that's going to be before your exam. I think I have to open a calendar, but let's see. Yeah, so the last class is this week. Then you have kind of a week off because it's like Easter, and then you have your final exam here. So we could make it like the Friday, so it's like a week before the exam. But yeah, it depends on your schedule, like for other classes and stuff like that. But does that sound good? Okay. Sorry, just say it louder. I don't care. Also think of yourself like if it's due really, really late, you're going to procrastinate, right? And eventually it's going to be like, oh, I'm going to do my exam first and then I'm going to work on my project. And then it's going to be a big disaster, right? Because you'll give yourself 2 days to do a project, right? So sometimes it's good to handcuff yourself. So anyways, I think the Friday, a week after class, a week before your exam is good. I'll pencil that in. If you want to negotiate further, bring your negotiation tactics next class, and we can revisit it. Okay. So yeah. So it will be without penalty. Let me just pencil it in now.
So what about few days after the exam, like 3 or 4 days after the exam?
So our exam is on a Friday. I can accept it on the Monday that follows because I'm not going to mark the exam over the weekend anyway. But then it's 2nd of April, your projects are coming in. You're not going to be getting your marks until April 15th or so, you know what I mean?
Exam will be on like the last week?
22nd. Yeah.
I guess a week after the exam.
Well, no, because that will be okay, my other constraint is that I'm supposed to return my marks within 2 weeks of the final exam. So, yeah. So, okay, if you want the absolute latest possible date, it would be the Monday after the exam, which is on a Friday. Do you want that? But then, you know, you the week after the exam?
Yeah, by Wednesday we can do that.
I can't do it. That's too late. It gives me less than 2 weeks to mark all of your projects plus all of your exams.
Because I have another subject exam lined up.
Exactly. That's why this is bad.
I have another subject exam and presentation on that day.
Yeah. So let me just look. Make sure you have the weeks right though, because are you sure it's not the Wednesday before?
Project is in group, right?
Yeah, so some of you would have an exam on, there's none on the 25th, or
I have like
sorry, you have one on the 28th, yeah? I see. Yeah, no, I can't take it after the 28th, that won't be enough time.
Wednesday after the exam.
Okay, well, let's just take a vote. I'm going to give you 2 options. The handicap yourself would be the Friday before the 22nd. So that's 1 week after classes. You'll get your project done and then you can just work on your exams and you don't have to worry about your project. Or you can do the procrastination, which will be Monday, April 25th.
I think first one is better.
Okay, so who votes for Friday 1 week before the exam? Okay, so I see 2 votes. Sorry, let me pull up a calendar.
Exam is on 22nd, right?
The exam is on the 22nd. Okay, so 15th is technically a holiday. So why don't we say the 19th? Or the 25th. Those are your 2 choices. Okay, 19. Who likes the 19th? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Who likes the 25th? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, 25th carries. All right. So that's it. I will make it official on Moodle, and I will not go later than that. So if you have exams on the 25th or later, that's up to you. And any time on the 25th is fine. Like, it can be midnight. I don't care. Whatever. Okay. Great. Okay, other questions about anything? Nope? All right. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears. So we looked at usability and security. Now we're going to shift gears again and look at something else that is kind of in the theme of a security thing that most people don't talk about. Like a traditional security course is very focused on technical aspects of security, although this will include one topic that is a more traditional kind of topic to consider, but the way that we look at it or the angle that we look at it from will be different. So the idea here is a procedure. So a procedure is basically a set of rules that you define for handling something. We're obviously focused on it from a security perspective, so there should be some sort of security goal that you're trying to accomplish with the rules. So we're going to look at two things. Just as a warm-up, I'm going to talk about something that we all know probably fairly well, which is airport security. And this is actually a nice example because it shows you, it illustrates different aspects about how policies can actually become quite complicated, how there's different people that are involved. If the different people that are involved aren't sharing the right information with each other, then there's going to be loopholes or vulnerabilities in the procedure and things like that. So that's the first example. And then the second example will be more of a classic example. Is we're going to look at a policy that's implemented by every web browser. It's called the same origin policy, and it dictates basically like JavaScript and those types of things. It will also talk about cookies. So your browser has a policy about cookies that's very similar and inspired the policy about JavaScript and who's allowed to run resources and what's your JavaScript allowed to access and things like that, which is called the same origin policy. So we'll talk about the two of them together. So this is in a web browser. Okay, so we'll start with airport security. Okay, so let's say we want to fly somewhere. Right? We've all flown, I assume, probably internationally. So what's the very first thing you have to do? Say it loud. Okay, let's assume you have a passport, you have all your credentials in place. Now you actually want to fly somewhere. All right, so you have to buy the ticket, and that's actually where security starts. Okay, so the procedures kick in even at the ticket purchase stage. Okay, we want to buy a ticket. We're going to pay some money for it. Is there anything else that we have to do throughout the procedure of buying a ticket?
You have to show the identity document and then passport.
Okay, so let's take those two. Okay, so first off, we're saying you have to identify yourself. Is a plane ticket transferable? If I buy it and I can't fly, can I give it to you to fly? Okay, so a plane ticket is tied to an identity. Okay, so that's the first thing. And an identity in this case is usually a passport, the information that would be on a passport, name, photo, passport number, that type of thing. Okay, the second thing is, do you actually have to show your passport to buy a ticket?
No.
Okay, you can buy one on Expedia or somewhere like that, and you type in your passport number, but nobody's looking at your passport, right? I'm sure if you go to a travel agent or you go to the Air Canada booth or something like that, then they might look at your passport, but you don't actually have to show it, right? So could I book, if I know your passport number and your name and all that stuff, could I be the one that books a ticket for you? Okay, so there's no check that it's actually the person that's booking the ticket. Okay, that check will obviously come later, but at the ticket stage, there's no check. So, for example, show the passport. Okay, so it's sort of like I'm here, and I'm buying it from Expedia. So whatever, I show my ID, I pay my money, and then Expedia immediately emails me my ticket, right? I'm smiling because it's a trick question. Okay, what happens?
It sends a request to the airline that actually is in charge.
Okay, so from the user perspective, forget about what Expedia is doing for a second. From the user experience, what do you get? You don't get, they're like, we'll get back to you in 3 days.
In 24 hours, you send the ticket after you complete the booking.
Okay, so
Maybe you mean it's not a ticket, it's a booking for a ticket?
yeah, okay, so let's roll with that. So we'll call it a confirmation. So they send you a confirmation that, yeah, we got your money, you did pay it, all of that stuff, but we don't have your ticket yet, okay? And then like 3 days later or something like that, they'll be like, okay, now you're all confirmed and you have your ticket and things like that, right? Okay, so now let's go to the next question. What's happening in those 3 days? Why don't they just issue you the ticket right away? So they're obviously talking to someone, okay? So the suggestion is that they're going to the airline, making sure that, I don't know, that seat is really available or something like that. But if, let's say I booked it directly from Air Canada, then they don't have to talk to themselves, right? So does that mean that, is this 3 day later an Expedia specific thing because they aren't an airline, or is it with every ticket? I'll take guesses if you don't know.
Like, my personal experience is that when I book Qatar, I paid the money and instantly after that, within 10 minutes, I got my ticket to my email.
Okay. Yeah, so it could depend on country as well. So I'll tell you that, yeah, if I were to book it with Air Canada as opposed to Expedia, I would have the same experience of having to wait for the confirmation. So they're not actually in Canada anyways. They're not talking to the airline. They're talking to the government.
Check it if the person is like not allowed to leave the country or something?
Exactly, yeah. So the rule's called the NoFly rule. And yeah, it basically, it's not strictly you're not allowed to leave the country, but you can't fly anyways. And usually it's more than that, yeah. So what they're going to do is they're going to say, is this ID on the no-fly list? And then the government will come back and say no, hopefully. Okay, and if it's no, then you'll get your confirmation 3 days later. Okay. Could this ever be yes? So obviously, if you actually are on the no-fly list, then it would be a yes. Is there any other case where it could be a yes, even though you aren't on the no-fly list?
Professor, there is one thing that if that this Expedia, that thing doesn't do the ID confirmation from government, then when the customer or when the passenger will go for boarding, there they check their ID and like if there is anything, they just pop up that this person is not allowed to travel. Then why? Like, so basically.
So hold that question. So later when we get to the point where you think they should do that check, tell me. Interrupt me and tell me, okay? And then we'll talk about it. Yeah. So we'll answer that question. Now, I actually drew this diagram. I'm looking at my notes now. What they do is they do actually talk to the airport. It's Air Canada knows like where to go in the government. So the delay isn't introduced because they're talking to Air Canada, but it does actually go through Air Canada. So let me draw it right. And Expedia obviously has to also tell Air Canada that like this ticket is sold so that they can reserve it. So let me put ticket here. Yeah, and then they go to the government. And the government checks whether they're on the no-fly list. And this is the main source of delay. Now, it doesn't always take 3 days. It might take a couple hours, or it might take a day or something like that. Okay. Yeah. So this could be yes if you find yourself on the no-fly list. Could also be yes if you have a name collision with someone who is on the no-fly list, even though you yourself are not. So it depends on what they check. It's true. But what I can tell you is, so I don't know what the system looks like, and my expectation would be the same. But every now and then I open up CBC News, and there's an article about a 4-year-old or like a 2-year-old that has some name that is not allowed to fly because they're connected with terrorism charges or something like that. And so it happens. I don't know why it happens. It seems to happen less frequently. Either that story is told too many times in the media doesn't care about it anymore, or they did something to try and fix it. Right? Now, the other problem with this, if we think about stride, is repudiation. So let's say that this happens and you're a 2-year-old kid. What do you do about it? Right? And so the no-fly list is this like top secret thing. You don't know why you're on it. You don't know like any details. You don't know who to contact. It's not like here's the like hotline for like support for like the no-fly list or whatever. It's just like, and so people are just like, and the airlines don't know, and so it ends up being this big problem because no one knows how to actually change it. And so then they go to the media, and then eventually like it gets fixed because the media made a big deal out of it. But anyways, so hopefully that's changed. I have seen less of those stories, but I definitely remember 5 years ago reading those kinds of stories like a fair bit. Okay. All right, so we have our ticket. That's fine. Now we want to go to the airport. It's the day of our flight. All right, so we show up at the airport. What's the first thing that we do? We check in? Okay, so what does that mean? Or like, who are we talking to? What are we doing?
Counter officer.
It actually comes down the line. Like we just confirm that we are going to board the flight.
Okay. Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so there's basically three options. This step you can do online, so you don't talk to a human being. You can walk up to one of those kiosk computers and you can do it. Or you can walk up to the service desk, wait in the really long line, and then do it. And if you go in the service desk line, who's sitting there? Like that person, who's their boss? Who pays their job for their job? Okay, so it would be Air Canada or the airline itself. So they're not with the government, they're not the police, they're not anything like that. They're an airline employee. Okay, and what's the final outcome of that whole step? I mean, you do that. So before you go in, you have your ticket or whatever, and then now you're done that step. What do you have that you didn't have before? Okay, so it's all about getting your boarding pass and also checking your bags, potentially, if you have them. Okay, all right. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to obtain boarding pass. And check your luggage. Okay, so this is handled by, I'll just keep it concrete, we'll say Air Canada is our running example. You have three options. You can do it online. You can't check your bag online, but you can get a virtual boarding pass. You can do a kiosk. So this would be just boarding pass. The most like the least intervention you would have with a human would be a kiosk that would actually print out a sticker that you could put on your bag, and then you can walk your bag over to the conveyor belt. So it's possible to check your baggage without talking to a human, but that's going to depend on the airline, and different airlines do it different ways. So this will give you your boarding pass and luggage tags. Or you can go to the counter and same thing, you get your boarding pass and luggage tags. Okay, so these are the outputs. What's the input? What do you have to show them, if anything? Okay, so passport ID. So let's go through these 1, 2, 3. I'm checking in on my phone. How am I showing my passport to my phone?
On that you don't.
Okay, so do you have to show your passport or not?
No.
Okay, so you might have to, if you go to the counter, they're going to ask to see your passport. But let's say you really didn't want to show your passport. Could you get through this step without showing your passport?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so you could do online. With the kiosks, you usually have to like scan your passport. Yeah. All right, so is there an ID check? For 1, there's no ID check. For 2, they check your passport, like the machine reads it, but it doesn't compare your photo to your face, okay? So we'll say scan passport, no picture, check. And the third option would be you go to the counter, and then they'll probably do a picture check. Like they'll see that you're actually the person on your passport. Can you have a fake passport?
Yes.
Okay, so there are such things. You can buy them. They are harder. They're becoming harder to manufacture. Now they have like RFID chips and things like that. And so, yeah, so they're could be faked. And if it were to be faked, there's basically two ways. One is you just make up a fake name, fake everything. The other would be like identity theft, where you are taking actually someone's real ID. Maybe you're putting your photo on it, or they look enough like you that you think you can pass it as well. Okay, so they could be faked either with fake details or a stolen. But very expensive to do, like if you wanted to actually get past someone that knows what they're looking for, just like counterfeiting money, it's prohibitively expensive unless if you have like you're getting some value from being able to travel under a fake identity, you wouldn't pay for it. But anyways, okay. What about the boarding pass? Can they be faked? So some people say yes, some people say no. You don't know the answer, that's fine, but let's think it through. Let's try and guess. So I'm going to tell you no, it can't be faked. Why couldn't it be faked? I mean,
It's given by the airline.
okay, so it's given by the airline. It's printed on some weird piece of paper. But if I have it on my phone, right, then there's no paper or anything like that. So there's no physical authentication, like this is a real boarding pass because it's printed on the right paper or something like that, right? So it comes down to the QR code. So the QR code will say my name and my seat number and whether I can go to the priority boarding line, et cetera, et cetera. Why is that secure? Is it because I can't create a fake QR code that would have that information?
The QR code will have only that information which you used to buy the ticket. If
Yeah.
that information is yours or faked or forged, then that code will contain that information.
But what if I want to change it? So let's say I just want to change my name. So I look at the QR code and I see my name and I just replace it with someone else's name.
It must be some signature.
Okay. So that's basically the only thing that could make this secure or not. Okay. It's just because it's a QR code, it's not inherently secure. It's not like you can't reverse engineer it and figure out like where your name is in it. Like you can scan it and look at it and your name will be there. But if there was a signature that was applied, right, then you couldn't fake it. Okay. Who would sign it? Okay, so the airline presumably, right? And then who would check that signature? Okay, so the airline itself, okay? So anyway, so that would be the way to close the loop on the boarding pass. Now it turns out that I don't have, like, all this information I'm giving you is historical, right? So it's based on things that happened in the past. I don't know today what people are doing. But until at least very recently, there were no signatures on boarding passes, okay? So a boarding pass was completely unauthenticated information. You could change it, okay? Now, how good is that? Well, you change the name, you don't have the passport to match it, right? Probably somewhere in this procedure. You haven't got caught yet because no one's checked your ID yet if you logged in online, okay? But hopefully somewhere down the line, someone's going to check your passport and then you're going to get caught, okay? So there isn't necessarily a big consequence to being able to change your boarding pass. You could change your seat number. You could upgrade yourself to first class, okay? But then when you go to sit down, someone else is sitting in your seat. You both pull out your tickets and you both have, a boarding pass with first class. So then they'll check the registry from Air Canada and they'll see that you're actually supposed to be sitting somewhere else. Right, so it won't necessarily buy you, but if that seat were empty, right, then you could do it. Another thing that gets encoded on boarding passes is there's different lineups when you line up at security. And so in the US, they have a faster line called like TSA Fast Track, or I forget the exact name of it. But anyway, that's something that's on your boarding pass. So if you want to join that line, you could change your boarding pass, put the fast track on it. Then when you someone scans your boarding pass at a certain point, and then they would say go to that line instead. We'll get to that part of the procedure as well. Okay. So boarding pass could also be fake. If it is not digitally signed. So this was true recently. I don't know today, but. So you could change your name, but then you have to ask yourself, okay, does the passport match? You could change your seats, but then you might have a seat collision with someone else that's flying. Because you're only changing that document. You're not changing, it's not like you're hacking into Air Canada and changing your seat across the whole system. You're just changing what's on your ticket. And it's just a convenience, so they don't have to look at it. You can change your priority group for boarding. So sometimes they're like, okay, everyone in Group A come and board Group B, Group C, and if you're flying economy, you're always in like the very last group. So if you want to get on the plane early, get that overhead compartment, you could just put the wrong priority group on it. And so that would be something that no one would ever know that you did that. And you could change your security clearing priority. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so we now have our boarding pass. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to drop off our luggage if we have it. Do we just take our suitcase and drop it on the conveyor belt and then off it goes? Okay, what gets put on it? Okay, so there's going to be a tag and it's going to have your name and what flight you're on. Obviously the airport needs that because they have to put it on the right plane. And so at any time, if someone in the back end of the airplane picks up your bag, could they figure out it's yours as opposed to someone else's? So the answer is yes. It might be encoded or something like that, but it is tied to your name. Or let me put it another way. Could you say, oh, that's not my bag? Right. And so the idea here, repudiation or non-repudiation is no, you shouldn't be able to do that, right? You could say, oh, they took the tag off one bag and put it on mine or something like that. But anyways, the idea here is that you shouldn't be able to repudiate that the bag is yours. So with your ID and flight info. Okay, then it goes on a conveyor belt, and you never see it again until you land. So what happens is it gets routed to your airplane, dropped on your airplane. From a security perspective, is there anything else that happens after you see your bag? It ends up on your plane and then.
Yeah, security check.
Okay. So we don't know exactly everything that happens behind the scenes, but you better be sure that it's being checked out closely. And so, they'll probably use X-rays. So the conveyor belt will go through an X-ray system. They could use dogs to smell. If they decide they have probable cause, or even if it's just a random audit, they might open your bag and go through it. Now, there was a slight problem with this because obviously they have the right to open your bag and inspect it, right? So that's the one consideration you have. Other people are concerned that, especially when you get off your airport, you get off the airplane, you're going over to bag claim, maybe your bag's already there, right? Like sometimes it comes quickly, and so maybe it's like circulating, and someone else could take it, they could go through your bag, they could steal stuff out of your bag. And so at the very least, it would be nice to throw a lock on your bag. Not to protect it from security, right? But to protect it from other people, or you're not looking at your bag, you go to the washroom or something like that, right? And so that seems reasonable, right? Now, so there's basically two choices. You can throw your lock on the bag, and if they decide they want to open your bag, they're going to cut the lock, okay? Now, if they see a bag with a lock on it, right, are they less likely or more likely to want to open that and take a look at it? Maybe more, I would argue more likely, it looks suspicious, right? If you have a lock on it. So you might open yourself up. But anyways, so the US Security Service, it's called the TSA, will meet them in the next step. So actually, we can meet them in this step. So the security screening is by, I'll put the Canadian, so the Canadian one's called CT TSA. And so anyway, but this was an initiative by the US-based TSA. And so they had this great idea. They said, hey, we're going to sell you a special lock. Okay, this is a TSA Approved Lock. And it's like a normal lock. There's a key. All your friends, they're not going to be able to open your lock because they don't have the key. But there's two keys that open this lock. Okay, there's the key that you have that's unique to you. And then there's a special master key that the TSA agents have, and they can open this lock as well, okay? So then they can open it, they can inspect the bag, they can lock it again, put it on the conveyor belt, and then it's still effectively locked, okay? All right, so sometimes we call this general thing in security, it shows up, we call it key escrow. And, the governments every now and then, including, recently in the last year or so, they come up with, they're really concerned about like people using instant messaging that has end-to-end encryption because then they can't, they have no way of knowing. And so every now and then they say, well, maybe the government should force companies that provide end-to-end encryption to have the government have a master key to it. So basically your message, it could be decrypted by one of two keys, right? The end-to-end key that your recipient has, but then there's this special master key that the government has in case they need to use it. So that's called key escrow. So it's the exact same principle that happened here. Now, what do you think happened in this scenario? Anyone know? How many TSA agents are there in the US? How many would there be in one airport? Guess. Would there be 1, 5, 100, 50, somewhere between 10 and 100 probably? Like think of all the people behind the scenes that you don't see. There's all the security people at the security lines. Like there's easily like 50, right, in most major airports. There's hundreds of airports across the US, and then they don't work 24/7 every day of the week, right? So there's rotating staff and things like that, right? So I don't know how many TSA agents there are. That let's call it 10,000, or between 10,000 and 100,000 or something like that, okay? So that's potentially 10,000 people that have this secret master key, right? How many does it take to leak it? Just one, okay? So you have one of those 10,000 people, and they leak it on the internet, and you can 3D print it, and then this whole security thing goes down. So that's exactly what happened. It didn't even take very long. The key leaked, and you can buy them on eBay if you want. Or you can 3D print it yourself if you don't want to pay for it. So that's, in general, there's a general principle there with key escrow, right? So key escrow works great until the master key leaks, and then it's just, you know, it's a disaster. And we've seen it before, like DVDs is another example. So anyone remember a DVD? Yeah. So like compact discs that you know, play movies before the world of Netflix. And so the earliest DVD standards, they were actually encrypted. And the idea would be that your DVD player has a decryption software in it. It's like in a chip somewhere, so it's hard to get out. And then what happened is people said, oh, I want to watch my DVD on my computer. Okay, so now you had software-based DVD players. And so now that key had to be in the software. And once it was in software, it was very easy to fish out, right? It's basically, it has to be sitting in RAM in order for you to do it. And so it leaked. And then once it leaked, it was the same, every DVD on like the planet, or they had different zones, so maybe there was like 3 or 4 keys, but basically it leaked, and then you could rip any DVD you wanted. Then when they came out with Blu-ray, they're like, okay, we need to do something a little bit better, so we're gonna have this ability to like evolve our keys over time. So like if the key leaks, will issue new DVD players with a new key, and then all new DVDs won't work with the old key, kind of thing. And so they had this very sophisticated encryption system, but they never ended up using it because it was too onerous. You had to keep track of these keys, and all the manufacturers had to be in on it and stuff like that. So basically the key leaked. They never, as far as I know, they never actually revoked it, even though they had this technology to do it. And now you can rip whatever, Blu-ray, or there was another standard at the time, HD DVD maybe or something. But anyways, now no one does it. Now you just screen capture on Netflix, or you hold your phone up and take a picture of the screen. Okay, I digress. Okay, the other thing about bags that I'll just note that's important is, let's say that you forgot your toothbrush in your check. You want to put it in your check luggage, but you put it in, or sorry, in your carry-on luggage, but you accidentally put it in your check luggage. That's fine. When you're at the airport, it's somewhere else. But then you get on the airport and you really want to brush your teeth. So can you say, hey, can I go like grab my suitcase and get my toothbrush out? So obviously they don't want that. Could they technically do it though? If they really wanted to, could they go get it for you?
Yeah, if it's not in the plane.
So if it is we're going to assume it's in the plane.
Well, then it's difficult, but not impossible.
Okay.
Go, but it's not an easy job.
Okay. Where's the door to the baggage? So there's obviously a door on the outside of the plane because that's how they load it. Is there a door from the cockpit or from the plane itself to the luggage? And so the answer is no for most modern airplanes, okay? So they're actually physically isolated. So you could go outside the plane while it's flying and then go in and get the bag. But basically there's no way, unless if you're going to like break through a wall or something like that. So there's physical isolation of your bags. So this obviously just makes airplanes cheaper to manufacture because it's one less door. Is that why they do it? So it's actually a security consideration. Okay, so what they want is they don't want you putting, bomb materials in your bag and then having access to it. Ideally, they would like it so that if you had a cell phone, you couldn't call a bomb that was in your suitcase. That's not always possible, but if it's in an isolated metal enclosed area, at least it's hard to get a signal across. And if you happen to have a bomb, maybe it was timed or something like that, the physical isolation also protects the people in the cockpit to some extent. Okay, so the physical isolation of your baggage is a security feature of airplanes. Okay, so we went to the airport, we bought our ticket, we got our boarding pass, it's on my phone. I got rid of my bags, they're done. Who do I talk to next? Okay, just tell me where I go, even if you don't know who they work for. Okay, so immigration could happen at different places, but usually it's not the first place you go. So usually in Canada, if I recall correctly, if I fly to the US, I do that after going through baggage check or security clearance. And usually it's actually when you land, right? Then you do the border thing on where you land. So some countries have pre-border screening and some don't. So not border agents. So we went to the kiosk. Okay, security check. So what does that mean? Be more specific. What? Okay, so the big metal detector thing. Okay, now. Sorry? Yeah. So we'll go through what they do there. But let me ask you, are you sure you don't talk to anyone before you drop your bag in the bin, right? You pick out 5 bins for all of you take your laptop out of your bag and all that stuff. Okay. So there's always somebody, there's a big lineup for security, hopefully not too big, and there's someone at the start of that line, okay? And they say, can I have your boarding pass? Do they say, can I have your passport? No. Okay, so that's important. Okay, so they're not doing an identity check, but they are asking for your boarding pass. And then I think in some countries they do look at your passport. I think in the US, I recall that they maybe look at your passport at that stage, but in Canada they look at your boarding pass. Anyway, we're going to call this the pre-screening because it happens before screening. Okay, so who is this person? Do they work with the airline?
I think they work for the airport.
Okay. So they're going to work with TSA, which is the people who will check your bags and do the metal detecting thing. And they don't work for the airline because everyone uses the same security line, right? There's lots of different airlines that use the same one. Okay, so they will check your boarding pass. It's possible they check passport. But anyways, not in Canada. Okay, so why are they here? What are they doing? What's their purpose?
To not let people in.
Okay. Sure. Did you go in the right line? Sometimes there's you know, an international wing and a domestic wing, and you find yourself, and if you go all the way through security and realize you can't get to where you need to, that's going to be a problem. So part of it is just, you know, routing people. So you're at the right gate, or the right security check for the gate that you need to find yourself. Anything else? So say it louder. So they check your boarding pass, but for what purpose? You said over 40 plus? Okay, but what are they checking on your boarding pass? Okay, so yeah, so making sure you're not flying on the wrong day or things like that. Yeah, so, okay. So yeah, let's put that under the top one. So they're going to check that you're in the right place, right time, all that kind of stuff. You haven't missed your flight. Yeah.
They check your luggage?
Yeah, so we did that already. So we have the whole baggage check. No worries. We spent a good half hour on it, but you can listen later. Yeah, go ahead.
Like if someone is going ahead without a boarding pass, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, so they're going to make sure you do have the boarding pass, all the information is accurate, and that type of thing. They're going to timestamp basically when you went through. And this information will get relayed to the airline. And so let's say that the airline is about to leave and you haven't shown up. Then they can say, oh, we haven't seen them at the airport, or they got to security, but they're still in the security line. It basically gives them some way to sort of track people and how far they progressed through the system. Okay. This person could also shortcut you. So let's say you're running late or something like that. They might let you skip the line. They can direct you to some security lines are shorter. So in Canada, there's a Nexus system that has a new name now. I forget what it is, but anyways, it's a different security system. Usually just a shorter line is all it comes down to. In TSA, they have, I guess it's called pre-approved. That's the name I think it's called. TSA pre-approved, but basically it's a shorter line, less scrutiny with it. So there's that. All right, so they stamp. It's basically to track movement. So you'll notice that when you actually get to the security person too, they also want your boarding pass. So they also scan it. So they know you're still in the security line or you're past the security line. Essentially, that's the information that they know, or you didn't show up at all. And then, is there a security purpose to them? Are they just there to make everything smooth and convenient, or is there an actual security purpose? And so no one knew for sure, okay? But then there was a leak of a document that showed that actually they are a security person, and what they're doing is they're screening people based on their behavior. And so we can look at this. So they're an actual screening agent, at least in the US, not necessarily. It's not necessarily in every airport, but it's possible that they are doing this. So in the USA, there was a program called the SPOT program. And they were looking at behavioral indications of a security threat. Okay, so what does that mean? Anyone want to take a guess? You're acting weird? Yeah. So that's exactly right. So what would be some weird ways that you might act? Okay, nervous, sweating, looks suspicious, awkward looking, like not making eye contact. Yeah, mentioning bombs, that type of thing. Joking about it. Okay. So you all laugh, but let me show you exactly what they are. So this is the spot referral report. So these are the things that the agents will be looking at. Whoops. Can you read that? Okay. So stress factors, I won't read all of them, but I'll give you a taste. Arrives late for flight, avoids eye contact, exaggerated yawning, excessive fidgeting, clock watching, head turning, shuffling feet, shaking your leg, excessive perspiration, so sweating, a pale face from recent shaving of a beard. Okay. You laugh, but anyways, this was controversial when it came out because it had racial undertones. But anyways, facial flushing, faster blink rates, atom apple jump when requested to submit to screening procedures. Anyways, so these are a bunch of stress factors. Now, if you exhibit one of them, you get 1 point. Okay, so you can remember that. Now, these ones are a little worse. Okay, so make sure you don't have any bulges in your clothing. Make sure you don't have a cold, penetrating stare. If you're looking around at security personnel, like, because I give this lecture, I'm always looking at, where are the security cameras and who am I talking to and things like that. So you have to be careful. Inappropriate attire, exaggerated emotions, and then these are really bad. So these are the 3 pointers. So confused or disoriented, you appear to be wearing a disguise, so don't go with a fake mustache or something. You ask security-related questions, so you're asking people about the security procedures and things like that. If they tell you to do something and you just don't do it, if you're like secretly signaling to someone else that's in line, or it looks like you're doing that, and if you're like patting yourself as you're walking through the X-ray, then you get 3 points. Okay. Anyways, so down here you can see that this is the score. So if you get between 0 and 3 points, it's no problem. So you can do some of these things, but not a lot of them. If you get 4 to 5 points, they'll do secondary screening. Okay, so that means they're going to pull you in another room and pat you down or ask you some questions or things like that. And if you do 6 or more, then they're going to first screen you secondly, but they're also going to notify law enforcement organization, which is LEO. So they're going to call the cops, basically. So it's also important to note that these aren't cops. Okay, so they aren't police. TSA, they're a little different than police. They can't arrest you, for example, but they can detain you, and then they work with law enforcement if there's a need to work with law enforcement. Okay, there's also some things that would take points off. So if you're part of a family and you're doing all of this stuff, if you're a married couple, but you're both over 55 years old, then they take 2 points off. And if you're over 55 or 65, if you're a male, 55 if you're a female, I think I'm reading that right, then they'll deduct a point as well. And then there's another set of programs. So this is basically like things that the way you behave. And then this is probably not implemented by the person that's scanning your boarding pass at the end of the line. This would be more later when you get to the actual security gate. But if you open your bags up and they see things like blueprints, GPS units, like training, military manuals, that kind of thing, a whole bunch of prepaid cards, rope, wire, duct tape, loose batteries, things that look like bombs anyways, then they're going to assign a point to you. And then there's also, this goes back to signs of deception. So these ones are more like you're just standing in line. Like what are you doing as you're standing in line? And this is like, okay, now I'm talking to you. And so now that I'm talking to you, how are you acting? And so it's a lot of the same thing. So if your voice is like changing in pitch because you're nervous, if you sort of talk through your mouth, if you take a really long time answering questions, so yeah, if you have vague responses to questions, yawning, non-answers, gazing down, excessive throat clearing, whatever, fast eye blink, you're going to get points for all of this stuff, and then eventually you'll get referred to law enforcement. Then there's some, I think there's some, whoops, really bad things that get you put directly in jail. Let's see.
How come GPS be a things that they are going to?
Yeah, so GPS would be, it's sort of like military gear.
It's like
And so,
normal for like people like who are trader or like.
exactly, and that's why it's a point system. So like, it's not like you just get a couple points. So if you have a bunch of this stuff, then it all kind of adds up. But the idea would be that if you just, there are legitimate reasons for almost any of these things, right? You're late for your flight, you're nervous, you're sweating because you're late, right? Like there's all sorts of scenarios. You don't like flying, you hate flying, and you're sitting there having a mini panic attack because you're about to fly. You know, there's all sorts of reasons why people would do this, right? So anyway, that's the thought. I'm not justifying the system, but that's the thought. Yeah, and then these are things that, whoops, this PDF reader always does this, but there's a list of things that get you automatic referral to law enforcement. So if you do too many of those points, there's some suicide bomber indicative behaviors. I don't know what they are, but presumably you're trained with this. If you're disorderly, if you have 2 or more signs of deception, if you're carrying a weapon or explosives or something like that, large sums of money, that's usually something over $10,000, which you have to report. And in particular, they'll ask you, why do you have so much cash? And then if they don't like your answer, then that could do it. If you just refuse, if they're like, step through the x-ray and you're like, no, I'm not going to do it. Yeah, if you're concealing prohibited items, if you're doing surveillance, if you have drugs that are unlawful, if it says travel documents, in this case, this would be like fake travel documents or something like a fake passport, that type of thing, then you'll automatically get referred to law enforcement. Okay, so that's the SWAT program. So this screening agent is sitting there, and they're doing a little more than just the logistics. They're starting to look at some of these behavior indications. They're trained in that program, at least in the U.S., but not necessarily here. How successful was this program when it leaked? Okay, so 96% of people pass the spot inspection without being referred to law enforcement. It doesn't say anything about secondary screening, I just have the law enforcement numbers, but 4%, that's still a pretty big number, right? It's like there's 75 students, obviously not in the room, but in this class, and so 4 out of 100 would be like at least 1 or 2 students like in a class like the size of this would be referred to law enforcement. That's pretty crazy. So this 4% were referred to law enforcement. And yeah, LEO, if you want to look closer at that document, that's law enforcement officer. So then the police, whatever, they do their inspection, or they at least question them and they make a judgment. And so 96% of the people that were referred, they let go. So they didn't find any reasonable cause for detaining. So we can call them false positives. But then 4% of the 4% were actually detained and charged. Okay, so this program is mainly it's to do with terrorism, right? So that's the TSA's job, right? They're basically, they want to keep the airline secure, and they want to make sure that people aren't putting bombs on planes and things like that. Okay, so of the 4%, what percentage of them were terrorists or suspected terrorists? And the answer is 0%. So they didn't find a single terrorist. So then what are all these people? These people are being detained by the police. You know, what else is there? Like, what else could they possibly be doing that's bad? So 10% were just sort of miscellaneous. I would imagine like drug-related charges would be one that would be in that 10%, but they didn't really specify. And then 90% were undocumented travelers, or people that were in, say, the U.S., because this was a U.S. program, that weren't allowed to be there. So they didn't have the visa, they didn't have the residence, or it expired or something like that. So anyway, this program was heavily criticized then because it looked like they were just looking for undocumented people under the guise of looking for terrorism, but they weren't actually finding terrorism. And so anyway, so it came under a lot of scrutiny, but this stuff's all secret, so we don't know, was it discontinued? Do they still do it today? Did they change it? We just don't know the answers to that until someone else, another TSA agent leaks like whatever their current practices are. So it was unsuccessful, at least at its stated purpose of preventing terrorism. It was criticized, and we don't know whether it's still in effect. Okay, one last quick thing on this pre-screening. So we talk about the agent at the start of the screening line. So they're the first person that are going to look at you and look at your behavior. Is that actually true, or is there anyone that would be looking at your behavior before you hit that first person? Sorry? Gavin True?
Gavin, like the airplane, like if there is some.
Yeah. So before in this case.
People in the counter will be first.
Okay, they work for the airline. It's not their job. Sorry, say it louder? Yeah, so there's security people walking around. Let me tell you, you do not see another TSA human being until you hit this first person in line. Okay, there's no one else around. Sorry? Okay, so there could be like spies among other passengers and things like that. There's something even simpler. So the answer is yes, you are being looked at, just not by a human being. Right? Who are you being looked at? Or maybe a human being that's behind a screen. There's surveillance everywhere. Okay, surveillance cameras and things like that. So you also have surveillance. And a big question that's probably, it's probably technology that they're using, but no one knows the full details of, would be some sort of facial recognition software. So it's very possible that as soon as you walk in the airport, they know exactly who you are, and they know exactly where you are at all points as you go through the airport. That technology at least exists. To the extent that it's being used, we're not sure. Facial recognition itself is used, like if you fly to the UK, for example, then you have a kiosk that is comparing your face to your passport picture, and it's using facial recognition. So we know the technology is in airports, but the degree to which it's used for surveillance, we're not sure. But you could imagine some enterprising machine learning people going through this SPOT program and deciding how many of these things they could detect using computer vision. and having automatic points being awarded to people. And then if you really know about machine learning, you could think of all the ways that that could go wrong, right? So anyways. Okay, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll go into the security line. Okay, so now we're in line. We wait in line, and now we come up to the metal detectors. And so let's see. Okay, so first off, who's doing this? Who are these people that work for Air Canada, or is it the police? Like, who is it that's running this?
TSA?
So TSA is it? So it's you. And what do you give them besides your stuff? So I'll put all your items that you're carrying. Do they want anything else? Do they want your passport?
They ask you to put it in the.
Yeah, so usually they put it, do they look at it, do they scan it, put it in the computer? No. What about your boarding pass? Yeah, okay, so they do type in your boarding pass. Your passport's there for inspection, but they don't automatically look at it. Okay, so they're going to search you both as a person, and they're going to search the items and stuff that you're carrying. To search your items, what do? You put them in bins, they go on a conveyor belt, and it goes through something. What is that something?
X-ray.
X-ray machine, okay. So what's an X-ray? Just make sure everyone knows. Okay, so it's like a see-through thing. That's about my level of explanation too. It's like somehow it uses radiation or something, and it can see through. So if you put a bag there, it knows what's inside your bag. All right, then in addition to the X-ray, they might actually manually search your bag too, right? Especially if they see something they don't like, or if they quote unquote randomly audit, then they're going to open your bag up and they're going to take a look and see what's actually inside of it. Okay, what about you as a person? So you put your items, at least that are in your pocket, your shoes, we'll talk about that stuff in a bit, but you put a bunch of your stuff and it goes through the X-ray, and then the rest of you, what do you do?
The scan, security doors.
Okay, so you're going to go also through some machine. Is it an X-ray machine? Okay, so you actually have a variety of different technologies that it could be. So the most common, cheapest one is a metal detector. And it could be both something that you walk through and like a wand or something that people use to scan. Okay, and what's this thing?
Yeah, that's also a detector for when you have something in your pockets or in a compartment.
Okay, so there is an X-ray machine that you would go through. I'll call it a full body scan. And that's the one where you go in and you put your hands up and there's this thing that whirls around and scans you. So you can opt out of this. You have the right to, at least in most countries. Why do people opt out? Okay, so one thing is the radiation itself. So because it's X-ray, so a metal detector, it's sort of like you're not going to fly. If you're scared to go through a metal detector, like too bad, right? But an X-ray, that is a little more invasive, and so there could be radiation. Usually, we don't talk about it so much, or we don't think about it a lot because we're always the passengers on flights. But all airline personnel, pilots, flight attendants, they also have to go through security as well. They don't line up with you. They have special security gates but they go through it as well. And they do not do full body scans because they're getting scanned, a couple times a day or many times in a week. We do it like once every 3 months or whatever. I don't know how much you fly, but anyways, they're doing it very regularly, and so they're more concerned about radiation exposure. There's also a privacy consideration. So people don't like their nude bodies being shown on a screen to someone. And so there were some countermeasures that were put in place for this. So one of them is that the person that's looking at the screen is not in the same room as you. And in fact, they don't have any actual line of sight. So they're only looking at people on the screen. They have no idea what you look like in real life. And then they have some way of communicating if they see something that requires secondary inspection. So that's a countermeasure that's implemented. Now let's say that you do opt out. Okay, then what happens? They're just like, okay, no problem, you can go on the plane. Okay, so they're going to do a full body, like a pat down is what they call it. Okay, so this is where they're physically going to feel you pretty hard, and they'll check all your crevices and everything. Sometimes you'll have that anyways if you get called for secondary screening. So if they see something in one of these two, then that's sort of the default. Or if you choose to opt out. Sometimes they have a metal detector, so they'll be like, okay, go to the metal detector. Other times they'll just automatically do the pat down. I opted out once just for fun to see what would happen, and I got pat down. And then I was like, forget it, I'm just going to go through this because it takes forever. And it's awkward for everyone. Okay, is there anything else they do?
They take away forbidden items.
Say it louder, sorry.
They take away forbidden items from you.
Okay, so we'll talk about that. So there's the stuff in your items, and I'm going to go through like what items you're allowed and what you aren't. But in terms of you as a person.
Sometimes they check you for the drug with the markers,
Okay. So sometimes they have these chemical swabs, right? They come around with this like long tong, and there's like a little cotton thing on the end, and they start swabbing you. Okay. So these are chemical swabs. And then they put the thing in a machine, and the machine's going to tell them something. So you suggested they're looking for drugs. What do you mean, like cocaine, heroin, like illicit drugs? Okay. Anything else it could be?
They have the dogs around.
Yeah. So dogs also do the same job. So we can put that here as well. Okay. So it turns out that the CTSA or the TSA, in general, they're not concerned about drugs. Okay. If there's evidence you saw in the SPOT program, if they open up your bag and they see drugs, they're going to refer you to law enforcement, okay? So they're not going to turn a blind eye to it. But it's actually, they don't really care about drugs so much. Border agents are different. We're going to meet them later. They care a lot about drugs, especially as it's going across borders, okay? CTSA are much more concerned about bombs. And so what they're actually testing you for are chemicals that would be used for making bombs. And that's what the dogs are sniffing for too. They sniff the chemicals for bomb making material. They might sniff for drugs as well. There might be different kinds of dogs. We don't know everything, but the main priority of CTSA is trying to find, it's basically to stamp out terrorism as opposed to stamp out the drug trade. So that's what they're mainly looking for. So I'll put also illegal drugs, possibly, but we're not sure exactly. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so let's talk about the items. So they're going to go through your items, obviously, because they're looking for certain things. Okay, so anything that you could use to do a terrorist attack, they're going to remove. Okay, so, or they're going to like not let you board the plane and also screen you and potentially refer you to law enforcement depending on what explanation you have for having them. So obviously you can't go with a bomb on a plane. Other weapons like a handgun or something like that, unless if you're licensed to carry it on an airplane because you're like an air marshal or something like that, you're not going to be able to board with it. Even if it's legal, like it could be in the US, a state where you're allowed to carry a weapon, but that doesn't mean you can go on a plane with it. And weapons aren't just guns, it could be knives and things that could be used as weapons, like a Swiss Army knife, for example, I once had confiscated. And so, yeah, there's a wide range of things. We won't go through all of them. Yeah, so weapons, knives, etc.
And that's a jar.
That's sorry.
That's a jar. You know, like this. That's a.
Oh yeah. So that would be a liquid, right?
I guess.
Okay. We'll get to that. Is that something you had removed?
Yeah.
Nice. So there's two reasons for that. It could be here because it's liquid, but it's more of a gel, so I don't know if it applies. And it could also be the border agents don't like food going across the border. But anyways, that's good. Okay. Anything that also is looks like illegal activity, but the TSA don't really care about, but they will, if they see something obvious, they're going to report it. Okay. So drugs would fall under that. I should always say illicit drugs. Obviously, you can carry medication and things like that. Cash, a lot of cash. You know, so technically anything over $10,000 you have to report. So if they see that, then obviously, but if you show up with $9,999, they're still going to ask questions, okay? And if it's taped to your body under your clothes or something like that, then they're going to ask questions about it. Even maybe you're legally allowed to do it, and sometimes you do it. There's actually I'll save this story for later. Okay, so cash is fine. Yeah, like fake IDs, fake passports, that kind of stuff. We saw other things like if you have GPS equipment or military maps and those kinds of things that could also raise questions. So anyway, generally this is not TSA's job, but they'll refer to law enforcement. Okay, now let's talk about liquids. Can you bring a liquid? Can you bring a bottle of water onto a plane?
Just 100 milliliters though.
Okay. So the rule is you are allowed some liquids, like perfume, cologne, like that kind of stuff. Toothpaste is a gel, but anyways, the basic rule is that you have a bottle less than 100 ml. And then there's usually a second rule. Does that mean you can bring can you bring 100 bottles that are all under 100 ml? So the strict rule, it depends on the country, but they often say, here's a Ziploc bag of a standard size, and all your liquids have to fit in that bag. So you can't actually bring lots and lots of small bottles. So the total liquid fits inside a Ziploc bag of some dimensions. I'll put a standardized bag. And they often want it in a Ziploc bag. So I've had like obviously less than would fit in airports, like in the Caribbean once, and they're like, well, it has to be in the Ziploc bag, and if it's not, like, we're going to throw it out. And you can go buy a Ziploc bag, but you have to like go all the way out of security and like buy it. And I just like forget it, and so they threw out a bunch of my stuff. I was kind of mad about it, but anyways, serves me right. Okay. All right. Is there any exceptions to this rule?
Yes, during COVID time there is an exception because all of us mandatorily have to carry a hand sanitizer,
Mm-hmm.
which is liquid actually.
It's a gel, but yeah. Okay, so there could be. I haven't checked that myself. I won't put it in the notes, but that sounds reasonable to me. First off, let's go back up a bit. What's the philosophy? Like, why don't they want you to have a bottle of water on the plane? They want you to be dehydrated. It's because they want you to buy the $4 bottle of water once you get through security. Okay. No, so they're concerned about you making a bomb, right? So lots of bombs could be made with liquids, and so they're concerned about limiting the amount of liquid so that if you are taking liquid bomb-making material, you basically don't have enough to make a significant bomb. All right, so the philosophy is to prevent liquid explosives. Okay. First off, can you put liquids in your checked baggage? Okay, so that's no problem. And in that case, whatever, it's in its own separate part of the airplane, whatever, we talked about that, okay? What if you go to duty free and you buy a nice bottle of whiskey to take home? You can go on a plane with, but that thing's like, that's...
But nobody checks.
Okay. All right, so duty free could be an exemption. The voice of experience. So there's all sorts of perfume and liquor. Those are the main two things that you buy. The theory of it is it's sealed. Now, let me ask a slightly different question. So let's say I'm flying wherever. I'm flying to Bologna, Italy, and I'm going through Paris. Okay, so I board in Canada. I go to the duty free. I buy my liquor. I land in Paris, and then they spit me out, and I have to go through security again because it's stupid. I don't know. I have to go to a different terminal. But I have my duty free bottle, and it's sealed. Can I go through security with it? Okay, so the answer is actually no, generally. Yeah, so the seal doesn't actually really mean much on it. So it is sealed, it's true. They don't recognize, like, the airport in Paris can't know how Canada seals their bags and how the US seals their bags. Like, it's logistically, it's problematic. You could fake a seal. So the main security around duty free isn't actually the fact that it's in a sealed bag, and this is why you could open it and drink it, okay? The main consideration is you're buying it when you're already past security. And everything that's being sold past security went through security itself. Okay, so that's why a bottle of water is $4. It's not just that they're ripping you off and you don't have any other choice. It's that they had to like drag that through security. They can't back up a huge truck and just unload, tons of bottles of water. Like, they have to route them all through. They can't just load it up in the store. Like, it's actually logistically difficult to get those bottles of water into the store itself. Everything is checked. There's audits and there's security lines that you don't see. That's for all the stuff that's being sold. So that's basically why duty free is okay, but you can't go through multiple security lines. So it's usually something you purchase after security, and it itself was examined. So we sometimes call that the secure zone when you're through security. So it's sort of already inspected, so that's fine. Okay. Is there any other liquids that you could possibly get on a plane that's over 100 ml? Okay, so if you have some medication, that is true. You would need a prescription. Or they could ask you for the prescription. Could you fake a prescription? Probably. So if you really want to make a liquid bomb, now I don't know much about medication. I don't know like that there's a lot of medication that would be of that size. I don't know what it would be. But anyways, anything else? All right. So I have kids. I've traveled with them, including when they're babies. If you want to take breast milk or formula, you can take as much as you want. And I've done it. I've had like a huge crate of formula because I wasn't sure I could buy it where we were flying to. And so we went with lots of it. And there was more than enough to make a bomb out of that. But because you have a baby, then they deduct points because you're a family or something. I don't know. So baby formula, breast milk. Okay. There's one other thing that you're allowed to travel with that's over 100 ml. That's actually just a personal effect. It's just like perfume, cologne, deodorant, toothpaste, like something that you would travel with. Does anyone know what it is? There might be people in the room that do. I see lots of people wearing glasses. Yeah, okay. So if you wear contact lenses, then you're allowed to take solution across. Now, why is that? I don't know what the rule is. I think the motivation is that you just can't do much with 100 ml of contact solution. Like you would run out too fast. And so for whatever reason, there was an exception made for that. And so you can take a liter of contact lens fluid across if you want. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So all these rules, I should say, they are true at some point somewhere in the world. Everything I tell you. That does not mean go show up at the Montreal airport with contact lens fluid. But fairly recently, I think it was about 2 years ago, there was an article, and there's a security, like one of the famous security people named Bruce Schneier, and he hates like airline security. He thinks it's a security theater, he calls it. And so for fun, he took a journalist through the whole process, and a lot of what I'm telling you comes from things that he said and other people like him. But like one thing they did is they faked a boarding pass. So they created a fake one, and they went to the short security line even though they weren't allowed to, and I forget what else they did. And then another thing just to prove it is he brought a bottle of contact lens fluid. It was, I think, a liter or something like that, and took it on the plane. But that wasn't good enough. He actually brought 2. So he had 2 of them. And then the agent actually asked him, he's like, why do you have 2 bottles? He's like, well, I have 2 eyes. And so, and then they let him through. And so it was fine. They didn't care. So anyways, if you want to put a liquid bomb on a plane, just put it in contact lens fluid. I didn't say that. All right. What else do you have to do? So you take your liquids. First off, do you just leave them in your bag? So not often. Usually you have to take it out and put it like in a bin, or at least on the top of the bin or whatever. Is there anything else that you put, like you have your bag, what else are you like rooting out of your bag or off of your person? Okay. Sorry, everyone talked at once. Say it one at a time. Sorry? Electronics, yeah, okay. So laptop, that type of thing. So you pull out electronics. Okay, why does it matter? It's going through an X-ray machine anyway. Like, why does your laptop have to be in a separate bin? That's what they want. They don't always enforce it, but they want it in its own bin.
I know why. Because they are going to see a lot of circuits on their X-ray, and they want to make sure that the circuits in the laptop are not covering the circuits that are used to make the bomb.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Okay, so they're going to pull out electronics because they look like bombs from an X-ray. because of the circuitry. And liquids are the same story. Like a bomb, if you looked at it through an X-ray, if it was a liquid bomb, you would see some circuitry, right, to trigger it, and then you would see the bomb, which is the accelerant. And so if you put a bottle of water beside your laptop and put it through an X-ray machine, you can't really tell that it doesn't look like a bomb. Okay, so they'll get very good. Like they'll see a million MacBooks go through, and I'm sure if there's anything like slightly off by your MacBook Air that they would think it looks weird. They also want it separate because sometimes they'll challenge you to turn it on. Okay, so they want to see that it's functioning. And that's because you could put a bomb inside your laptop. Maybe not in this is maybe too thin, but if you had like an old laptop from the 90s, like a ThinkPad or something like that, you could probably fit a lot of stuff in it. You could also probably make it turn on, right? You could have a little tiny Arduino trip that like doesn't, like, it's not a full operating system, but it's enough to turn the screen on and say welcome or something like that. So I don't know how effective it is, but they do sometimes make you like open it up, and they make a big production of like, okay, can you open it up and turn it on? And then they're like, okay, now you can go. Okay, so electronics. So it looked like bomb, or cover up a bomb. That would be the. What the other thing that you do sometimes, I don't know that you do it anymore in every country, but sorry, someone say it. Take your shoes off. So I think in Canada we still have to do it. I think in the US you don't. But. Okay, why are we all taking our shoes off every time we go on a plane? Once upon a time there was a guy who put a bomb in his shoe and tried to detonate it on a plane. Didn't work, right? The person sitting beside him was like, why are you trying to light your shoe like on fire? And then they wrestled them to the ground and took the shoe away. But basically, yeah. The critics of airport security basically argue that it's very reactive. It's like one person put a bomb in a shoe, so now we all take our shoes off. One person put a bomb in a laptop, so now we all take our laptops out. One person tried to bring a liquid bomb that they constructed themselves in the bathroom before they went on, and so now we all have to like have less liquid. And they'll say that TSA is not really thinking about real threats. They're not being realistic. They're always just, they're trying to like make the public feel okay about flying. I'm not here to argue that. I'm just saying that that's their perspective. But anyways, this is definitely one of the things where it was indirect reaction. Like before the shoe bomber, you never had to take your shoes off. After the shoe bomber, you had to take your shoes off. Now you're starting to not have to take them off anymore. So yeah, it could be reactive security theater is the term that Bruce Schneider, for example, would use. Okay. So now we okay, so now where do we go next? All right, so we made it through security finally. We go to the bathroom, we get a coffee, and then where? Is there anyone else that we talk to, or do we just sit down on our plane? Okay, so there's always someone at the desk before you get on the plane. The other thing that may or may not happen is you might go through customs after you go through screening. So if I'm flying to the US from Canada, they do customs there. Sometimes it's after you land. Let's do customs now just so that we get it out of the way. So I'll put optionally. So yeah, so it's either here or it's after you land, or it's not at all because you're flying domestically within a country and so you don't go through customs. Okay, when you go through customs, what do you do? So you wait in line, you go, you talk to someone, what do they want to see from you? First off, who are they? Are they the TSA? Are they the airport? Who's the person that's in that booth?
Border services.
Okay, so it's a totally different, still government, it's related to law enforcement, but it's border service. They're distinct. So they're not TSA, they're not the same people that are doing the metal detectors. They're not law enforcement, like when they find drugs on you and they refer you to law enforcement, that's not them. They're their own thing. So they're called Canadian Border Services would be the Canadian equivalent, and they'll have different names around the world. Okay, so sorry, what do they want to see? Okay, so they want to see who you are, so your passport.
Your face, fine.
Okay, your visa, if you need one. So usually they have two lines depending on, or more, depends, but like for example in Canada, Canadian citizens would go in one line, they wouldn't require a visa, but you would have to have the passport. And then non-Canadians would go in another, and then if you're from the US or something, there might have some special deal where you can go with the Canadians or something. Okay, so there is a face check. So ID check. Say louder. Sorry? Okay, so they're going to ask you, so they want to know your travel information. First off, do they look at your boarding pass? So they don't strictly, usually they do, in my experience they do, but it's not really part of their, the reason that they want to see it is actually for the rest of your travel info. They don't care, like, are you flying Air Canada, are you economy or whatever. They're like, okay, where did you fly through to get here, right? Did you come, what country are you flying in from, that type of thing. And so in general, they just want to know, why are you here? You're in Canada, why are you here, right? Are you here to study? Are you here because you live here? Are you here because you're a citizen, you're returning from travel? What's your reason for doing it? And they will dig as deep as they need to get an answer to that question, okay? There's a really cool TV show, I forget what it's called. I think it's called Border Services or Border Security or something like that. And it's a reality show. I think it's in Canada, and it's actually of their border services. And you get a sense of what, like, all that they're looking for and things like that. And they have a lot of power too. So if they don't like you, they can basically throw you in the equivalent of jail, detain you. You don't have the right to a lawyer. They can ask you to unlock your phone, decrypt your computer, all sorts of things, okay? And they will go through that type of thing, okay? So why are they there? What are they checking for? So they basically want to screen out, obviously, any kind of terrorism, but that's mainly TSA's job, but they'll look into terrorism. So terrorism here would be more like you're on a no-fly list, you're coming from a country that's like, that there's sanctions against, like that type of stuff. As opposed to, are you carrying a bomb? Because that's like TSA's job kind of thing. They are the ones that care about drugs, okay? So you can't take any illicit drugs across the border. They care about money. The basic rule is $10,000. And so in the show, there was an instance where like someone had like $9,999 on them. And at the end, they're like, you know what, we can't do anything about it. And so they let them go. So they actually counted it all because it was like a fair, it was like a large volume of money. So they had to sit there and they had to count it and stuff like that. But eventually they're like, well, the rule is $10,000. It's not quite $10,000. So there's nothing we can do. Okay, your Nutella. That's another thing. So they care a lot about food items. So that's another thing on the show. It's kind of strange, but they're always pulling people aside because they have a plant or they have some vegetables or something like that. Why do they care about that?
Professor,
Yeah.
if the money is in the form of coins, like for example, under $10,000, but in the form of movies and movies.
If it's in coins
Yeah.
itself, then it would be a heavy suitcase. But yeah. But they would count it all. They have machines, they can count it quickly. Yeah. Why do they care about food items? Sorry, say it louder. Yeah, exactly. So it's like different insects and stuff that are in different, that could come along with the food and things like that, diseases and that type of stuff. So that's mainly, they don't really care about food per se, but they don't want organic material from other jurisdictions coming into the country. They also care about stuff that you bought when you were somewhere else. Okay, alcohol, for example, there's rules about how much you can bring back. Cigarettes, there's rules. Just merchandise in general. So if you go on a shopping spree in another country and you want to bring all that back, or if you're entering the country, they care about what are you leaving behind, right? Are you going to a trade show? Or are you going to sell a bunch of stuff, make money in the country, and then leave? And this stuff's not illegal. It's just that the government wants money for it, basically, right? So it's called duty. So they want to make sure that you're paying everything that you're supposed to pay. Okay, and then the last thing is illegal immigration. So they want to know, what's your stated purpose for coming into Canada? Do you have the right visas and things like that? And this is where they can they can really flex their muscle if they want to. So if you watch the show, this is like another thing that comes up. And so someone will say, "Oh, I'm coming to Canada. I'm just tourist. I'm coming and I'm traveling." And they'll be like, "Okay, where are you staying?" And then they'll be like, "Oh, well, I'm staying with my relative." They're like, "Okay, open your phone up, pull them up. We're going to call them." And so, and then they call them and they start talking and they're like, "Oh, do you know this person?" And they're like, "Yeah, they're coming to work for me, for the summer or whatever, and they'll go through your phone, they'll check your text messages. They'll like I say, they'll just keep digging. If they get some hint that you're not saying the real reason, then they'll dig and dig and dig. And yeah, and a lot of people don't realize that they're going to go through your phone and they're going to call people, like they're going to go through your contacts and just randomly call people and stuff like that. So anyway, that's another big component to like border control as well. Okay, last but not least, we're finally ready to board the flight. So we're at number 7. Finally. 1 hour later. It took longer to lecture through this than to actually go to the airport and get on a flight. Okay, so last check. You're going to go to the like little desk. They're going to call your boarding group up. You faked it, right? So you change your boarding pass so you can go in Group A. You might not want to do that because they have a computer and they can see, because they actually scan your boarding pass, right? So what is it that you're showing? You're going to show your boarding pass. Anything else? Okay, finally. Okay, so they check your passport. Does it have to be a passport?
If it's an international flight, then it has to be.
Okay, so passport, or if you're flying domestically, you can actually go with a driver's license. It feels really weird, but I've flown to Toronto and I've always had my passport because I'm paranoid, but sometimes for fun I just show my driver's license just to make sure it works, and it works. They're fine with it. Okay, and they're going to do the face check. Okay, they're not just going to like scan your passport. It's not a kiosk or something like that. They're going to look at the passport. They usually have your picture on the screen if you're able to get a glimpse at it, and they look you in the face and make sure that you are. I've never flown during COVID. Anyone who has, you have to take your mask off? Yeah, presumably, okay. Okay, so they do a face check. You get a different what? Okay, yeah. So there's other reasons that you might talk to these people, like if you're on standby or. Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah. So yeah, there's that possibility too. So they work with the airline. So if the airline needs to do any revisions to your flight, also if you're late or something like that, or they know that the flight is delayed, they might change your downstream flights and things like that, give you new boarding passes and stuff. Yeah. And then sometimes you don't get a boarding pass actually until you go see these people. So that's kind of scary, but like you go to the kiosk and they're like, oh, like go to the gate agent, right? And then you get your, let me write that actually. I forgot that that's what they're called, but the gate agent. Yeah, and then that's usually when the flight is full. So then you're sitting there, you don't have a ticket, and then you hear the message. It's like, okay, this flight is like overbooked. If anyone wants like $100, like to not fly, and then it's $200, and then it's $300, and then you really want to fly. Like no amount of money would like make you skip the flight, and then but you're sweating because you don't have the ticket, and then anyways, eventually it works out. Usually, I hope. For me, it does. But okay. Now let's say that you're flying domestically. Okay, so you don't go through customs. Otherwise, you go through everything else. Who else checks your? Who is it that looks at your passport and your face and your boarding pass? Okay, who actually checked your face before this?
Last person before entering. No.
Okay, let's start at the top. We buy the ticket online. They don't check. We do the online check-in, so I get my boarding pass on my phone. No check. The baggage, they don't check. Pre-screening, I show my boarding pass, but I don't show my passport. Security screening, I show my boarding pass, but I don't show my pass. My passport's sitting there in the bin. They could look at it if they want, but no one is necessarily looking at it. Customs, they will always check, okay? But we're going to assume, just for the sake of argument, that it's a domestic flight, so they won't check. And so when we board the flight, they do the check, okay? So that's like the, basically the only stage. So you can make it all the way to the gate and no one has actually seen whether you are the person who you say that you are, okay? And if you can believe it, it wasn't too long ago when they wouldn't even check your ID at the gate. They would just say, do you have a boarding pass? Yes, no. And then you could just get on, okay? Now imagine if that was the case, okay? Then what you could do is, let's just write it down. So what happens if no ID check at 7? And we'll say on a domestic flight, so we're not going through customs. So this is like 15 years ago, 20 years ago almost, but it was a sort of famous story because the person figured out what would happen and then wrote about it and then got their door kicked down by the FBI. And so his name was Chris Segoyan. He is a security researcher. And so he said, basically, you could be on the no-fly list and you could get on a plane. So this, in stride, we would call this an escalation of privilege. Shouldn't be possible. And so this is also why we're talking about policies, right? So now let's put this whole mess together and think about all the different people that are checking different things and make sure that certain invariants hold. Like, you're on the no-fly list, there's no way you should be getting on a plane, right? So this is what he said. You go, you book a flight under a fake name. Not a fake name, but like the name of a real person that's not on the no-fly list, but is also not you, okay? Okay, and this person checks when they do the no-fly. This person isn't on it. Okay, and this is the only point. It's when you buy the ticket, that's when they check the list. Okay, so that's great. Now you have a ticket, but it's in someone else's name. Okay, so what are you going to do? Then what you do is you make 2 boarding passes. So you have your real boarding pass. By real, I mean it corresponds to this person. So it's in the other person's name. Then you make a fake boarding pass. With your name. So we'll call this one number 1. Call this one number 2. Now it turns out you don't really need to use boarding pass number 2, but there is possibilities, like we said, sometimes in some countries, like the screening agent will want to see your passport and your boarding pass and things like that. So if you need to show, basically you always show the airline number 1. So that would be at check-in, gate, etc. And anytime you're dealing with the TSA, like you're in the security line, you're scared that they're going to pick up your passport and actually look at it or something like that, then you show number 2. And the TSA don't know that it's fake because they don't have a database into the airline. Like they're not talking to Air Canada's thing, right? So they're just looking at it, it's a QR code. They can scan it and it will say you faked it, so it has the name. And in this case, the name matches your passport. So nothing looks suspicious. Okay. All right, so why does the attack work? First off, it doesn't work anymore because now, very strictly, it's the airline's job to do that face check when you, that's basically what defeats it, right? So maybe I should say, why did this work? Because it doesn't work anymore. So basically you have 3 pieces of information. You have a passport that says who you are, and it says, it doesn't say anything about your flight, okay? Then you have like the airline database that says, okay, who are all the people that are flying with us, and the no-fly list check is applied to this, so the no-fly happens here. And then to link the 2 together, you have your boarding pass. So your boarding pass has a flight number that could get checked against the airline database. It has your name, which could get checked against your passport. Okay, so it's the missing link. But in order to make sure this is sound, I need to check all 3 of those. Okay, so that's what happens at the gate. The security gate is actually the most important in the whole airline policy because they scan your passport. It's the airline that's doing it. They check it against their database, make sure you really are someone that's on the flight. They look at your passport. They make sure the name on the passport matches what's in the database. And then they look at the face on the passport and they look at your face and they make sure that you are really the person that is the person that is registered in the airline database that is not on a no-fly list because that was checked a couple months ago. Okay? What was happening in this attack is that some people were checking these pieces of information and some people were checking this piece of information, but no one was checking all 3. So law enforcement, if you happen to have to deal with them, TSA, even if you went through like the border security, I don't know what would happen. His like sort of mental exercise was if you were flying domestically. But if you showed them a fake boarding pass, I don't know that the boarding services would be able to tell that that was fake. By fake, I mean like it corresponds to a real flight, but you just swapped out your name. I don't know that they have a computer that talks to Air Canada. I wouldn't want to test it, right? But who knows? And then the airline is checking this information, but they're not checking your passport in the way it used to be. So that's not true anymore. Okay. Now the airline checks all three at one stage, and so the policy works. But you used to be able to thread the needle and get through because different agencies weren't talking to other agencies. Okay. No one agency had access to all the information that they needed. Okay. So let's see. All right, so this was just sort of a fun exercise to think about procedures. I'll give you 2 lessons, and then next class we'll talk about a more serious, more technical procedure, the same origin policy. Okay, so first off, I hope I gave you the impression that they're hard to get right. So for decades, there was a way to fly with not being on the no-fly list, and someone just didn't put it all together, right? They didn't think hard enough about it or whatever the case may be. It's hard when you have different people that don't talk to each other. So I'll put it this way, when information is split between different people, so different people have different views of the procedure, but no one has the global view of everything. And if we're writing software, we can check for vulnerabilities. We can use static analysis or stuff like that. But what about like a procedure? Like, can you put a procedure and ask a computer, hey, is there any way that someone on a no-fly list could fly or not? And so the answer is kind of yes. You could translate this problem into a computer problem and then have the computer look for vulnerabilities. So that's called formal methods. So you turn it into a bunch of logic rules and access control rules, like this person can do this and this person sees this and things like that. The hard part with formal methods is, first off, you would have to customize it for each procedure. So if you're doing the whole airline procedure for the United States, that's fine. I mean, you could pay an academic to do that. They would do it once and then they would be sure that certain things held. But if you're talking about your organization and the policy that you have around who has access to the server room or something like that, then you're not going to do that, right? You're not going to get someone to do that. And there's no general tool that's going to do it, for everything. So it's customized for each application. And then the second thing is that it's actually it's hard to model. So you do have to translate every airport thing into a rule. And if you mess that up, if you mistranslate it or you miss a rule or you're making some assumption but you don't capture it in the system, then the system's is only good as the model that you give it. So if the model is incomplete somehow or it's too strong, like it makes assumptions that don't actually hold in the real world, then you're going to get results that could be a false positive. It could tell you it's secure when it's really not. So it's hard to do that translation. Okay. So that's it. Enjoy your destination, wherever you're flying. And I'll see you all on the return trip next week.